Hello everyone, my name is George Haas. Today I'll be doing a speech on my international experience in Canada. Growing up, I grew up in Rochester, New York, which is about roughly an hour and a half away from the Canadian border. So what we would do as children growing up in New York, a lot of the school activities would be centered around going to Canada as a field trip. Prior to 9/11, it was pretty easy to cross over into Canada. If you were a child and with the supervision of another parent, you didn't need a passport or an ID. Well, pardon me. You needed an ID, you didn't need a passport in order to cross the border into Canada. So, as a child growing up, I probably went to Canada about safely 8 times, and these were all yearly field trips that we would take with my school. When we would go, all we would do is just cross the border. We wouldn't stay on the American side. We would go across the border and we would go on the Canadian side. When we did so, it is a little bit of a cultural difference because obviously you are going into a new country. You're seeing new things. You're seeing new people, a new currency. You're seeing different etiquette. You're seeing how differently things move and operate. The sides of the road are obviously still the same, but it's just a different cultural experience. So to sum up my cultural experience when I was a kid, we would go over there, and every time we'd go over, it was pretty, I would like to describe it as almost like a Myrtle Beach type scene area whenever you crossed over the American to the Canadian border to see the falls. What they do on the Canadian side, though, that they do not do on the American side, which is pretty cool, is they light up the falls, which is pretty interesting. They make a pretty production about it. People obviously talk a little bit different with their little bit of an accent. They say again and a boot. Just a few of the small things. Back then when I used to go, the currency was actually a little bit less than it was in America, so you could go up there with, say, $1 and get yourself about 2 or 3 soda pops versus one. It's just the money was worth more, so it was cool to see how that worked as I was a kid going down there. The main cultural experience that I got out that stuck out to me was when I went to northern Saskatchewan on a fishing trip. Because as I said, as a kid when I was going over there, I was just basically crossing the border, and it was just a cool experience to say I've gone to a different country and see how different culture lived and different people lived, but I was just crossing the border, and it wasn't anything too vastly different. So long story short, we ended up going to Saskatchewan on a fishing trip. It was me, a friend of mine, and his dad, who is an anesthesiologist, was kind enough to take me along with him. Had a blast. I've been to Telluride, Colorado with them before. But we went up there, and our hosts or our guides for the trip, we were catching some big muskie and northern pike. And the guides were actually Cree Indians from the local area in Saskatchewan, all spoke the national Cree tongue, and were, as I said, our guides for the trip. And it was interesting to see how they approached life and how they lived. They lived in, as I said, the northern part of Saskatchewan. I can't exactly remember the part of the province it was in, but the long story short of it was these people lived off of the land. What they did was we would meet them in the morning, we would meet with the Cree Indians, they would have a little small breakfast, and that would consist of just some eggs and just something kind of just put on your stomach, some eggs and some bread. That was pretty much it. As I said, they lived majority off of the land. But we would catch some pike and some northern pike and muskie, forgive me, and we would go and we'd be out fishing, and I'm not kidding, when you're on this water, there would probably be about 1 to 2 boats, and then that was it, because it was locally inhabited by the Cree Indians, which is actually a larger tribe of Indians indigenous to that area, as well as some of the northern Dakotas and the Americas as well, but mainly up to the northwest region of Canada. So to make a long story short of the fishing trip, the Cree Indians showed us their way of fishing, how they caught the fish, what times they fished at, and how they basically lived off of this land and this lake. And forgive me, I do not remember the name of the lake to save my life, and I couldn't get in touch with my father to figure out the name of the lake. But they lived off of this lake for years upon years, and these fish, these muskie and these pike, that just almost overpopulate the water, so they use these guides in order to take people out, fish, and catch some of the fish. Long story short, it was very cool to see how their life lived, how the Cree Indians had control of the whole lake, knew what they could do with the lake. Interesting to see how they prepped the fish, how we would eat the fish, how we enjoyed it together, how they made it a certain point to come in off of the boat as the sun was setting, probably around dusk, and then we would have the meal, and as the sun set, that was the time to go to sleep, recharge the batteries, and start the day over the next day. It's a lot of information to jam into a 5-minute speech, but The two international experiences that I thought stuck out to me the most was when I went to Saskatchewan and I fished with the Cree Indians, and then just the numerous times that I went over the border to visit with my friends' family and school. Thank you for listening to my small speech about Canada.